What do we want to talk about today? We'll edit it out, this part out. And
I don't know. I don't
ideas.
think we should edit this out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
We've been talking a lot this week about the way men and boys are raised and the way that forces you at a very early age to disassociate from your body.
Yeah.
But what the specific consequences are for men and boys, because women and girls have the exact same thing. I mean, particularly the emphasis on disassociating from your body,
Yes.
I think might even be stronger for women and girls, but there's a set of different consequences.
Yeah.
Based on what both genders, the pressure to perform both genders does. Because gender is a performance.
Absolutely.
And we were all socialized to perform those well.
Yeah.
So yeah, we particularly, I mean, I love this topic. I like it when it's juicy. I like when we talk about sex.
Okay. So now we're here.
I'm not sure if Josh loves that.
No, it's good. It's important.
But the way that manifested in our sexual relationship. Okay. And you've been talking a lot on TikTok about how sex in our marriage early on felt like a desperate need because it felt like it was the only way you achieved love and belonging.
Yes.
So you didn't really come to sex for pleasure or sex for fun or sex for,
I thought I was.
Right. But you came to sex with like a desperation. You came to sex with like an anxiety.
Yeah.
The pressure to belong because it felt like the only place you really belonged. So yeah, I kind of wanted to explore that,
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
And maybe even give, like, I think there's not enough discussion about the way men and boys relate to their bodies. Like, even the idea of, like, body image issues we talk about in regard to women so much. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I mean, I love the way you've talked about it. I think so many people would benefit from learning the way you put it into words about your body. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
Kind of dissociated from your body and the way that works for men and boys.
Yeah, I think maybe since you mentioned the body dysmorphia piece and how we don't talk about that with men, I learned that from my mom.
Oh yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of people who don't talk about this, that in a world that didn't have equitable caregiving structures for parenting. Yeah. But you do have two parents.
And also the time is outpaced. If you have a present dad, a good dad, which the bar was so low for so long, he's at work 40, 50 hours a week. So you don't see him, even if he is wanting to be a good dad.
Yeah. So there's all the dynamics that come with that, which we could certainly talk about. But I think that means that there's so much... I don't look at any of what I'm about to say as my mom's fault. I just think that she was carrying far too much, and she had not been provided the supports necessary in her own life to kind of fully show up with her own autonomy. Yeah. But I watched my mom be very uncomfortable in her own body. Like, we were the kind of household, just like yours. Like, we never saw each other, like, in any kind of, like, nakedness. It was like a real direct picture of how afraid we were of being vulnerable. Right? So, like, there was going to be no vulnerability.
Right, no, we're like a watch and learn species, not like a tell and learn species. Yeah. So, like, human beings assimilate culture, a wisdom, and knowledge about how to be a human being from their caregivers, but watching them. So when you watch someone move through the world with wild insecurity, you're like, okay, well, I'm supposed to move through the world with wild insecurity. When you watch someone cover their body like a tent, like it should never be seen or witnessed, you internalize it like, okay, that's what bodies are for. Cover them up. Right. Let's make sure they're never seen or witnessed. So when you watch someone feel ashamed of their body.
Absolutely. But I want to go one step deeper on this, and it's kind of uncomfortable, right? So that my mom didn't have, from my perspective, a life that she really loved, but she couldn't say that. Even now, I don't know that she could say that. But that meant that she had to make it make sense. Like, all of us as humans are trying to make it make sense. So for her, what she did was she bought into the idea that us as children were extensions of her, and that was her value. So her love was directly tied, and I think the way that many people's are, but not necessarily healthily, in that love was a possession. Like, we belonged to her. Anytime we did something that was not in line with her, she really shut that down, because my mom is not somebody comfortable with big emotions. So you're talking about watching and learning as a way of being socialized, I guess?
Yeah, socialized.
And so I learned from my mom, not only like being uncomfortable in my own body, I learned that the way to make yourself feel better about not being comfortable in your own body was to possess somebody else's.
Oh, God.
Yeah. So...
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't have words for any of this. But, like, when we entered into our relationship and marriage with all the other purity culture messages, that was my default I was operating from. Was that, like, I'm not going to be comfortable in myself unless I have somebody else who can be an extension of me, who I can then kind of project this onto and own.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that
does
that resonate with what the experience felt like? Because like
yeah, no, I mean, it was very clear. I could never put it into words. When we were raised Christian, we did not have sex before marriage. We didn't start attempting to until after a marriage. Big mistake. 0 out of 10 recommend. Do not do that. God will not be mad at you. He created this. If there is a God, he looked down on us in our early marriage and was like, what on earth? This was supposed to be fun. You two are you're butchering it. You're butchering it. It was very interesting, the amount of like lip service you would give to wanting it. I want sex. I could have sex all the time. I would want it every minute. Like a lot of young men proclaim.
Right.
But then you would come to sex. You would also have this kind of uncomfort. You were uncomfortable with talking about it. You were actually quite uncomfortable with touching. I received almost no physical touch growing up except for negative physical touch, right? So like that was, yeah, you came with like this strange level of being touch starved. It was really interesting. And so it got real weird real fast for both of us. I came with some real interesting weirdness as well.
Yeah. But it was easy for me to project your background onto why things weren't working rather than to look at myself.
Yeah. So I was like sexually abused as a kid. And so Josh was like, oh, this is weird because of your abuse history. And I remember thinking, there's a lot more to this story, actually. And that's not the whole story, but it was a really convenient story for you to be like, that's why this is weird.
Absolutely. To displace my own responsibility. Like Richard Rohr's quote, like, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. I find that to be very instructive. So my family growing up, I also watched my dad, like, literally inhale food. Like, he came from a huge scarcity mindset, a lot of trauma as a kid where he didn't feel like there was ever going to be enough. He would say that he loved food. He would say that he was really enjoying it. But, like, you know, it was like 0 to 60 in terms of just eating as much as he could in
as
front of
fast
his
as
face
possible.
without tasting anything.
Yeah, no savoring.
It
was inhaling, yeah.
And so I'd witnessed that
and
as
even
well.
no regard for, like, how hungry am I? Because, like, no matter what's on your dad's plate, your dad finishes every plate, but never there's a question, like, halfway through, like, oh, I'm full, or, oh, you know, like, I'm no longer enjoying this. That's all those questions are never a part of his rubric.
So that's what trauma does. Trauma, I think, it doesn't give you an accurate picture of what's happening in front of you. It just asks you, is this better than what you know?
Ooh, yeah.
And so for me, that was clear. Like, being with you was so much better than anything I had known. But I wasn't paying attention to you. I wasn't paying attention to the moment.
Or to yourself.
I wasn't paying attention to myself. I didn't know how to pay attention to myself. So, you know, that idea that we're just going to consume something is such a huge part of our culture. But that's what I had in my head as sex, was the idea that I had access to consumption.
Yeah. Without
words for it, but that's what it was. It was like I'm so glad that I can have a meal whenever I want. Like, after starving for all these years, with zero understanding of how to savor or taste or experience or enjoy a moment or read somebody. Like, you know, like, this is like, so it wasn't sex that I liked, because I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
I liked the idea of release. But
yeah. And those are two different things.
Those are two different things. Yeah.
We don't talk enough about that. Sex and release are two different things. Sex is co-created. So that's the foundation of sex. Two people co-creating.
With full consent.
With full consent, with full enjoyment, full pleasure, full spontaneity, and zero expected outcome at the beginning. Yeah. Two people co-create, and it's almost like a painting. I think people aim to do a painting, but you don't exactly know exactly how it will turn out until that artwork is finished, exactly where the brushstrokes went, exactly what colors you chose. I mean, any artist will tell you that. Like, it's like a journey they go on. They had a vision, but how that vision is fully executed is adjusted throughout the art process. And like co-creating a sexual experience should very much be the same way. The exact outcome is not known until the end, that the two people have decided on. But you did not approach that way either. You had like a
not even close.
Very finite outcome.
Yeah.
And you wanted to get there as quickly as possible, which was also...
Well, there were so many layers of that over the years too. So it started
much like the inhaling the food. I'm not even going to ask if I'm hungry, if I'm full, if I'm aroused, what's happening. Exactly. I mean, because I want release as soon as possible.
Yes. So I think that, like, the embarrassingly so, the lack of sexual information that we had, certainly that I had. I think you talk a lot about, like, in our conversations, that you didn't really even know how the mechanics of sex worked, or like, you know, like, I'm going to be really bluntly, embarrassingly honest here, that I did not know how women's orgasms worked. I really believed, heading in at 21, that, like, the only way a woman could have an orgasm was through penetration, and that many women couldn't achieve it, because that's what I had heard.
Which is true. Through penetration, most women don't achieve orgasm. That's not how most women achieve
I hear you.
orgasm.
Yes, but from the culture in which I came, where people weren't talking about real things, the little bit that had seeped out was like misinformation to a grand scale, right? And then in that culture, specifically talking about like our fundamentalist kind of version of religion, like you stake your own value on certainty, not on curiosity. Ooh. So my ideas of sex was like, I don't really know about this, but like my default is going to revert to not asking questions. Right. And so that, I don't know how you become a good sexual partner without asking questions. Like not, at least not good ones. And I tried sometimes, but
open, honest conversation.
Yes. Yeah. About what's working, what's not working.
Yeah. Where the pleasure is. No, we both were wildly unpracticed. In Christianity, you're encouraged not to even think about sex as a young teenager. Don't even think about it because that's sin.
Right.
And so how are you supposed to have a healthy way to engage with your own sexuality when you're not even supposed to think about it, or that every time you do, you feel shame, you feel embarrassment. So I definitely came with that as well, but I knew I really wanted to have sex. I knew I really wanted to enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I came with a lot more curiosity and a lot more questions and a lot more interesting questions.
But like that food.
But you really kind of shut down in the face of that. You were kind of like, I'm uncomfortable. I don't really want to talk about this. Like I'm getting to the release. We don't need to talk about it in order to get to the release. So let's
talk about that for a second though, because the discomfort wasn't like it was feeling ashamed that I didn't know more. It was feeling like, there's this level of being a man that's supposed to be good at sex.
Right.
And so any conversation back then, especially, not just about sex, but anything that was like feedback, I took as negative criticism because I was that insecure. So I couldn't leave space to grow. Yeah. Because I couldn't listen to you. Everything that I heard, I centered my own experience and reflected it back as some further proof that I wasn't worthwhile, which never came from you.
No, I wasn't trying to say that.
That had always been part of my rubric, right? So really a lot of sadness, around that. And certainly like so far from, like you said, like a co-created mutually pleasurable experience where I'm understanding even how you're turned on or like
how arousal works.
Yeah. How arousal works. Like,
yeah. For your partner. I mean, that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Arousal works in like a million different ways. Like human beings, just like, oh my gosh, like every human being needs different levels of nutrition based on their bodies. There's some overarching themes, but like if you're in a relationship, you should really be a student of how your partner becomes aroused, because that's how you're going to have a mutually co-created. Yeah. And what I think is so interesting about sex, I think the most apt comparison for sex for me is actually laughter.
Okay. Yeah.
I think when humans laugh, you can laugh alone, first of all, and it's pretty enjoyable, That's true. And you can have a really lovely sexual experience alone that can be pretty enjoyable. I think actually for most women, shockingly, I think most men would find out that some of their best sexual experience have been alone because most men are such terrible lovers.
There's a reason book talk exists, right?
Right, exactly. That people are obsessed with spicy novels is because women get to explore their sexuality in its fullness, and there's nobody there to mess it up, really, because a lot of times men bring a selfish energy. Even though they've been told they want sex in almost a constant way, there isn't all this other richness or fullness to how the sex and sexuality works.
Yeah, and on the topic, I guess, I certainly did not know as a young person or even an older person how to sit in discomfort. But the other side of that is equally true, that I didn't know how to sit in pleasure. Ooh. Like the idea that you can be aroused and that can be fun and doesn't need to be getting rid of. I think a lot of men have this idea like, oh, now I'm turned on, I got to get rid of this. I'm like, what the actual F? Like what?
Like it's a hot potato.
Yeah, even like the idea of blue balls. Like, first of all, that concept is not exclusive to men. Like, women can be very sexually frustrated. Yeah,
right. Getting turned on, and it becomes almost painful for women too.
Yes, but the idea that like we would treat something that should be pleasurable as pain,
right?
If not like met with our specific, very narrow, blind outcome, is insane.
It's insane.
Like it's just a testament to how poorly this is going. Like, and
for everyone,
the lack of information that's out there, and like the desperate need for better conversation around it. I think.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm such a proponent of like high quality, comprehensive sex education. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This should be universal. Yeah. This should be the norm. It would fix so many societal problems. It would fix so many, oh my gosh, relational problems. Yeah. It would be such an investment in a higher quality level of community for all if people can get behind that. Yeah. Yeah. But our own, in terms of our sexual journey, I'd be curious, man, I loved what you just said about not being able to sit in pleasure. You couldn't sit in discomfort, but you didn't like the idea that you were having like a pleasurable sensation being turned on in your body. Because sometimes I really, really enjoy. I'm like, oh, I'm turned on. Like this is so fun.
Yeah.
Like just even like before anything's going to happen, like this is just really sassy and fun, and it's a cool feeling in my body. Same thing with being amused, like laughter.
Sure.
But laughter is like perfectly co-created.
Yes.
Like it's never laughter if someone in the room has to say, hey, made a joke, you gotta laugh. You gotta laugh. And you're like, ha 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 ha. Like no one would accept that as laughter. But somehow in sex and sexuality, men are like, hey, have sex with me. And women are like, okay, I'll lay here. Yeah. And men are like, oh good, we had sex. You're like, no, you didn't.
Or telling the same bad joke over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Like hoping that somehow it's gonna work this time.
Oh No, that's not laughter. And it's also like laughter is a co-created spontaneous response to human connection. Yeah. You're connecting on something and you're both meeting in the middle, right? Yes. Someone said something funny and someone is relating to all those levels and we laugh. Mm-hmm. Like laughter is like this outpouring, a natural outpouring of connection, like at its core. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what sex is as well. Yeah. And somehow it's so clear, like no one would ever believe that like ha 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 is laughter. Right. Well, like we would all agree like that's not laughter. Laughter has to be spontaneously and freely given, real laughter.
So let's talk about that for a second though, because what if in a world you'd never seen anyone really laugh? What if you also had never experienced true joy? That's the only way in which like you could take that at face value. Like anybody who knows what laughter looks like would be like, oh, okay, this is not working. Yeah. But like we really as men, I mean, I can speak for myself. I didn't know like what laughter even was in this context. So like sometimes I think women are like, how could you not know? How could you not pay attention to me? How could you just keep going?
Or pay attention to us.
Or pay attention to us.
I didn't want you to pay attention to just me. I was like, be present here, folks. Yeah.
And so I think it's both. I think it is an honest acknowledgement that I wasn't paying attention, right? Yeah. But there's also this other piece that is valid, which I think needs to be talked about, is that I didn't have the skill set to pay attention. Like I had zero practice. So purity culture specifically, I think, sets people up for failure. But purity culture is far more pervasive than just fundamentalist religion. I think that idea is part of the fabric of this country and culture. Now, even in terms of like, Bush's whole like doctrine on, abstinence only sex education. Yeah. I mean, this is the world we grew up in, and I hope that we can build a much healthier one. Yeah. But
yeah, I absolutely do too. Man. Yeah. If you've never heard real laughter, how would you know when you got it? Yeah. What are the things contributing to men not understanding what real sex is? Like, what are all the layers that like, obviously we have this purity culture background as a country, this lack of being able to talk about it, this massive level of discomfort with sex, even though we have on the one side, like we're super sexualized culture. On the other hand, like we still can't have honest conversations. Like that exists at the same time. But what are all the layers? Like, why wouldn't men know what real sex is? I say men, I think women too.
No, this is probably larger.
I guess I won't say men. I won't generalize. I'll say you. You didn't know it.
Yeah, that's
you didn't know what real sex was. You were content with ha 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 ha, like the sexual equivalent of like ha 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 ha. Like why didn't you know that there wasn't real like spontaneous true joy in sex?
It's uncomfortable, but it's true, which is like, again, from the point of view I grew up in, entirely about centering and entitling male experience above women's. On the condition, on the foundation that like the primary mode of communication is verbal. Okay. So if someone's not saying I have a problem here, there isn't a problem here.
Problem doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
Hasn't come out of your mouth.
Because there are many things you'd have to be paying attention to. And again, I can only speak for myself. I was not good at paying attention to people. Maybe some of that's neurodiversity, but I think a lot more of it is like lack of practice. Like men in this culture aren't being told to pay attention to people's feelings. Yeah. We're not told to like read like facial cues. We're not expected to kind of, like, read a room. I mean, the number of rooms I did not read before I walked into them, and just like, and I think, maybe this is a Glennon phrase, or maybe she got it from somewhere else, but this idea of entering into a room and the energy being either, here I am, or there you are. Mm-hmm. And hopefully in sex, it's two people being able to look at each other saying, there you are. Yeah. But I would come in saying like, here I am. Yeah. And here I come.
And I'm like, I know. There, I can see it. I can see that you're here. There you are. This is all about you. I didn't come into our sexual relationship thinking it was going to be all about you. I was like, I think that's kind of a lie. Hopefully no one really believes that. Yeah. But then you came with that energy, and I was actually quite crushed. I was really devastated and didn't know how to verbalize it or talk about it, or even be I mean, my grief was evident too. I made no, like, I did not try to hide that I was really sad about it.
No. Yeah.
But I also didn't know how to talk about it.
Right.
Like, why do you come into this activity with such, as a consumer? You come in as a consumer.
Yes.
Why do you come into this activity?
Yeah.
With zero like vision for how we both may enjoy. Like, why do you have that idea that this is all about you? And granted, I know why. I mean, everything in our culture says, like, this is for men. And even this idea you were taught or you absorbed, I think, through mostly porn, let's be honest. I mean, where else would you get the message that women can't have orgasms? Through penetration. Like, where you didn't learn that at church.
No, I didn't learn that at church. I learned that in trying to do, like, sex education on my own, but from such a poor like foundation. Like, so, I mean, if you think that any question in the realm of sexuality is putting you on the fence of going to hell, it's going to affect the quality of your research. So I would work up the courage sometimes with, like, Google, like, female orgasm, and then the information on the internet was so poor.
It was also male-centered.
But male-centered.
Because this is in the 90s.
Right.
We didn't have the voices of women equally platformed to the voices of men.
There was no
It was men telling other men how women work, which is always
absolutely
a massive problem.
Yes. So, I mean, I think pornography reinforced that. That it looks like there are women having good time. Now you're like, that woman's not having a good time.
No. Yeah. I mean, porn is made primarily by men for men. So it's, I mean,
I'm not sure who it's for. It's not benefiting men, that's for sure. It's only reinforcing this idea of release versus a mutual experience. It's really not working. But yeah, I got that. I mean, literally, like, going. I would go walk into, like, Barnes and Noble sometimes and walk down the little aisle with, like, the sex and sexuality books and just, like, really try to, like, police, like, who was walking around to see, like, when I might have 30 seconds to open up to a page in, like, the Kama Sutra. It was the equivalent of, like, reading a book in a different language. I have no context to understand this. So, I don't know. I did have a moment thinking that maybe I was mad. I was mad that other men had not taken me aside and explained some of these things before marriage, even in a purity culture. Look, if I can't do this at all, I can't talk about it anywhere, but you guys have crossed that threshold. Like, it'd be helpful to have some information. But the topic was so taboo, especially among other men in that culture, that there was nothing being shared. And so I got mad at one point in time, like, oh, like, I couldn't accept my own responsibility. I certainly couldn't sit with the harm I'd done to you. So what I wanted to do was displace it. I wanted to be, like, mad at somebody else. Why didn't you tell me? And then I had to come to the conclusion that, like, I don't think they knew. Like, I don't think they had the answers. So it was
which is actually true in my experience, because we grew up in the same church background, and the women in my church did talk to me about sex ahead of time, and the things they said were, you're not going to like it. Yeah. You're going to have to do it anyway. Yeah. It's a chore, like taking out the garbage. You're just going to have to do it even if you hate it. So I know the men in our church culture didn't know how to have good sex, because the women made that very clear. And I was like, as they were telling me this, I was like, not me. Right. I'm not going to have that problem. Like, I really like sex. I really want it. And I had no idea the degree to which, like, the men in our spheres had so little knowledge of their own sexuality, of how to communicate about sex, about how to be sexual creatures truly in their bodies and their minds at the same time. Because sex is, like, done with, body parts, but it's actually primarily a brain activity.
Right. It's both.
But it has to happen in both.
It's got to be both, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, can you talk about that for a second, though? Because the messages were at odds in the wrong direction for both of us. So in the church culture, I was getting no information or really poor information about how I could, use sex as a place to finally feel not just whole as a person, but maybe even pleasing to God. because there's this whole aspect of, like, oh, you're a boy and you need to control your sexuality, but don't worry, once you have a wife, like, then she'll take care of it for you.
Like a vending machine.
Like a vending machine, which is gross.
Yeah.
But, like, as a woman, you're getting the opposite information, that if things aren't going well, it's your fault, perhaps, or it's your responsibility to show up as a duty, as a responsibility.
It's your obligation. Sex isn't mutually co-created, enjoyed activity. Yeah. Sex is a wife's duty. Yeah. Sex is a wife's chore for your man.
Right.
It exists for that purpose. Yeah. So backwards, so unhealthy, so untrue, such a lie. Yeah. And definitely, like, the foundation for, if you want to have a terrible sex life, please believe those ideas. But if you want a great one, please throw those in the garbage and then light it on fire.
Oh my gosh. We're healing our relationship now. I think we're making progress, which is, like, I'm incredibly honored by, because I didn't know we'd ever even get as far as we've gotten.
No, I didn't think so either.
But I think the reality is, and I can't speak for other people, but, like, that work could only start when I started to face me.
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't a you problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you,
No.
you knew how to show up the whole time.
Yes.
And maybe you started to doubt how you could show up by being with somebody who could
No, I
meet
had
you.
like done some really unhealthy things to protect myself from you. So I became sexually dysfunctional in reaction to how dysfunctional you were, just to protect my mind and body from how terribly you showed up.
Yes. So my dissociation spread like a disease into you.
It did. It really did. Yeah. Which I'd love to talk about more. We're kind of like a little crunch for time. We're going to expound upon this. So maybe a multiple-part series about, how the dysfunction arose in our sexuality and our marriage, and maybe how we're kind of working toward healing.
Yeah.
But thanks for showing up for this conversation.